does go. Way to save the season to throw. Fire and down! Incomplete down at the goal line by San Diego. Tomlinson off the left side. Tomlinson sidestep. Hello, history books. Think they have to now. Here's Sproles. Sproles inside the 10, inside the 5, and the Chargers win the game. Charger fans are witnesses to history.
What's up, good people? Welcome. Lightning Round Podcast is back. We went on a brief hiatus, but we are here, and we're here to talk about training camp. It's right upon us, just a couple weeks. We got rookies reporting, then the whole team reporting, and we'll all be at training camp. We'll talk about possibly a meetup sometime later in the offseason, but welcome, Jamie, Craig. We're all back. Welcome back.
Nice to be back. It feels like it's been I don't know, 6 months. It hasn't, but it feels like it, doesn't it?
It definitely feels like it's been a while, but I mean, I'm sure a lot of that has to do with life and everything else that we all have going on individually. So I'm sure people get that, but yeah, kind of got to knock the rust off and get back to it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, we went so hard during draft season. It was nice to get a little couple week break, but we're here, especially in a dead space. So we are so back, as Todd said, and that is true. So today we are covering special teams, and we're going to cover the defensive side of the ball. And then next week we'll work on offense. So we're going to go over everybody on the defensive side of the ball, everybody in special teams, which is obviously a short list. We'll talk about all the UDFAs, some training camp battles, and everything in between. So let's go ahead and start with special teams because it's real short. There is no competition here. It is Cameron Dicker at kicker. It is J.K. Scott at punter. It is Josh Harris at long snapper. Do you guys have any notes of these three? Anything at all?
They're all making a done deal. Let's move on.
No, not at all. Seems pretty cut and dry.
And I don't, not to just add a little something, but just to add a little something. J.K. Scott, I mean, out of this group, you're not going to worry about the long snapper, obviously. Dicker has been clutch. But J.K. Scott is only the real question mark of this group. The hang time is nice, but he's been – it doesn't feel like he's been consistent enough to not bring in another punter, at least as some kind of competition, or at least a show of some kind of competition, because he hasn't been so consistent that, you know, he had automatically won a job. I get Dicker. Who cares about a long snapper? But it felt like Scott could probably use maybe a college kicker, or you get a UDFA in there and compete with him, but it is what it is. He's the punter of the future, at least for 2024.
They have so many positions, or at least spots on the roster, I feel like, up for grabs, that maybe they just feel like they didn't need to have that one competition right now. I think they're in a position where they might have some bigger fish to fry at this point.
I would agree.
Maybe that's the point. They've got so many other things to worry about. It's like, you're not going to make me watch punters now too, are you? I get it, because I would be, you know how we feel about special teamers. So at least kickers and punters. All right, good. Cool. Well, let's move on. And we are going to go to the interior defensive line and then work our way out to DBs. So for the interior, the list is Morgan Fox, Poona Ford, Atito Abonia, Scott Matlock, the rookie Justin Aboigbe, the egg boy, Christopher Hinton, Gerard Clark, CJ Okoye, and the UDFA Michael Mason. Jamie, how you feeling about this group?
It's pretty vanilla. There's not much to it. Hopefully they got a couple guys that step up. You know, we talked about Aboigbe coming out of the draft, about his effort and his motor. Matlock's a guy who I think they're hoping steps up at least as an interior pass rusher. Ford's flashed at times and had some good seasons. So there are some guys there who I think can produce. I don't think there's anyone that you like really, hone in on and say, that's the guy. That's the guy who's going to make this group work. I think that's going to be a work in progress. And I think there's some guys here that are kind of transitional, right? Like Fox is in his last year. Agbonia, Tito is, he was kind of a project of Staley's. He hasn't been on the field much, hasn't been healthy the last couple of years. What do you expect from him? So I feel like there's a chance for maybe a couple of guys to grab spots on this roster. Maybe a Clark, maybe a Hinton, a Mason. We could have a couple surprises.
Yeah, I would call the group overall pretty uninspiring. But with that being said, there are a couple names on here that I think stand out a bit just based on some of the things that we saw during scouting. Like we've identified Scott Matlock as a guy who can definitely probably make a name for himself. I would say he's more of a 4I, 5T right now, but he probably needs to work on that functional strength, and maybe he can reduce down and get some 3T work a little bit. But as far as just an interior disruptor, he probably has the best chance. Christopher Hinton is an interesting name also, just being a former Michigan guy as well. So having experience in that system, I'm not sure if that gives him a leg up, potentially maybe, but he's got some pass rushing chops as well. But with the rest of the list, Morgan Fox, he's a guy that can get in there and be someone that can give you some pressure, kind of in a rotational role as a pass rushing specialist. Won't give you a ton against the run, not an every down defensive lineman. And as far as the bigger guys in the middle, I mean, as far as just true nose tackles go, Otito Ogbonnia and Gerard Clark, who was a favorite of mine, coming out of that, was it 22 or 23 UDFA class? I think it was 23 UDFA class. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Ogbonnia was kind of stepping up a little bit. He was showing some improvement there before he suffered that injury, I believe, in his rookie season, cut his year short, and wasn't really all the way back last season. So definitely some question marks, but some names in there to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Morgan Fox is going to get a lot of run in this D-line just because of his flexibility, which, it went from he could have been a cap casualty this offseason to, being one of the stronger parts of this unit here now in the defensive line. Poona Ford, Scott Matlock, the rookie Aboigbe are going to be really important in terms of rotational roles on this defensive front. I know they're going to be moving those guys a lot. But there's going to be a group of these guys that are going to have a lot to prove this training camp with a brand new regime. You got to assume that Tito's going to be part of that rotation as well, but he's going to have to really prove it this training camp. He always got high praise in almost every training camp, and he never cashed in on that praise during the season. The new staff is in. That favor that he kind of won with Telesco is gone, and now he's got to go out and play. He's played 15 games in 2 seasons, hasn't been effective. This is a really, really big camp for a guy like Ogbonnia. So I'm looking for him, hopefully, to step up and join that rotation with Ford and Matlock and Eggboy. We were all high. Craig had Gerard Clark as a sleeper. I watched him because of that. We were all really high on him in this last UDFA class, last camp. And, if they are as high as they said they say they are on stopping the run, Gerard Clark is a guy that's going to be really, really important to rotate in the middle of that line. Hinton, while he has Michigan ties, he's been with the team for 2 seasons, kind of a bottom of the rotational pool of this group. And then, I know Okoye was a nice preseason story for an international player last year, but I find this UDFA Michael Mason pretty interesting. I don't know if you guys got to watch him, but uber productive at Wofford and Coastal Carolina, kind of an undersized interior guy who's more of a gap shooter, wins with pursuit, pretty decent hands, converts speed to power. I think he'll need to add a bull rush and probably get stronger in the run game, but it feels like he's more suited to be more of an end in the NFL, but he feels like a name to watch in this group. If he doesn't make the team, feels like he's a strong practice squad candidate because he's already pretty developed as it is coming in as a UDFA. Let him bulk up, add to that pass rushing tool set, and you might have kind of a nice little developmental guy. So I like Michael Mason. I'm not sure he makes the team. They carried 60 linemen last season, which means from Fox, Poona Ford, Scott Matlock, Aboigbe, that's 4. So then you've got the rest, Tito, Gerard Clark, Hinton, Okoye, and Mason for basically 2 spots. So they're all going to be competing for that. And I think, Ogbonnia might get one of them, but it just feels like, there's a lot of jobs up for grabs here, at least 2 spots in my mind. So, but in terms of this UDFA, Mason's an interesting one.
Yeah, I liked him too. I think I saw a little bit of a bull rush at times from him. There was a rip move. He had a little swap move to the outside shoulder. Showed some quickness into the gaps, like you mentioned. Kind of reminiscent of how Morgan Fox likes to win. Some stunts, some quickness in the gaps. Pretty strong hands. Wasn't super productive against the run in terms of TFLs from what I saw in the games that I watched, but he seemed to hold his ground pretty well and make plays around the line of scrimmage, generally speaking. So a guy who I think will probably flash at times in camp and certainly in the preseason. I think Abonia is a guy who might be on the outside looking in. I mean, you talked about it, Garrett. You know, he's 2 years in, hasn't really put much of anything on tape. He was, I think, drafted to fit a specific role in Staley's defense, which is now no longer here. And I think this defensive front is going to require a lot more versatility and flexibility. And I don't know that Abonia really has much to offer outside of being a 5 tech and maybe a 1 tech. I'm just not sure there's going to be much pass rush there, and I'm not sure what he offers. So he could be a guy who's on the outside looking in. And I feel like if you assume Fox, Ford, Matlock, and Aboigbe make the roster, which I think is a pretty safe bet, I think you're probably looking at 2 of Hinton, Clark, and Mason sneaking in to grab those last 2 spots. I don't know how much Hinton's, Michigan ties really factor into this. I think those Michigan ties are a little older, are they not? They're not terribly recent, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not sure how much that plays in with Harbaugh and the Michigan crew. But if you're looking for playmakers up front, if you're looking for run stuffers, for guys who can create pressure, I don't know that Abonia offers that. Whereas I feel like Clark and Mason are guys that offer kind of a good 1-2 punch versus the run, and in certain pass rushing situations. I like Mason as well. I think he's a guy who could surprise some people.
If we're being honest about Hinton, I think the whole Michigan connection to Harbaugh thing is a bit oversold in general. Harbaugh's never really shown any loyalty, I would say not, to a significant degree for any guys that have played for him, in his prior stint in the NFL. So it's not just a given that he'll make the team because he's a former Michigan guy. But again, it can't hurt to have a little bit of experience in the system. If he doesn't make the team, no, I will not be surprised.
All right. Now let's go outside on this D line. Let's talk about these edge guys. It is Joe. The list is Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Tuli. I'll just call him Tuli because I just mangled his last name. Bud Dupree, Chris Rumpf, Andrew Farmer, Ty Shelby, Chris Collins, Savion Jackson, and Tremont Morris Brash, who's listed as a linebacker on the Chargers depth chart, but more of an edge guy, so he's part of this list. Craig?
All right, so top 4, we all know what the deal is there. On paper, we're talking about arguably the best, 4-man in the league at the edge position on paper as of right now. Okay, so we know how that looks going into every season in a lot of these positions, but there's a really good opportunity. I would say, I know this isn't going to be like a hot take at all, but I think Tuli's going to take a really big step up here this year, mainly because there's no more rookie wall this time around. He's also not going to be a primary focus if in fact Joey went down for a few games. Whereas we saw last year, Bosa goes down. We saw the production drop off a bit from Tuli. He's still very good against the run, developing those chops as a pass rusher. Not the most athletic guy, but we know his motor's always running hot, and he's not going to give up on any play, whether it's to his side or pursuit backside. That Bud Dupree signing is huge. In general, just because we know that the odds of all 4 of these guys being 100% healthy all year long isn't probably very high. But now at least there won't be as much of a drop off if you suffer a blow to one of the edge positions for any significant amount of time. So when we're talking like the back end of the roster, this might be the end of Chris Rumpf. He was a core special teams contributor. He was performing really well there. Will that be enough to keep him around? I'm not sure, especially if you got one of these guys, say, for instance, like Andrew Farmer or Ty Shelby, who's showing anything in camp and that, you can put on the field on special teams as well. If they perform better than him in just core defensive plays, I could see Rumpf being on his last legs with the team. Some of the guys towards the back end, Savion Jackson. I think Jackson was like 263. I think he played some interior defensive line. What was he at? Was that NC State, if I'm not mistaken, that he came from?
Who are we talking
from
about?
NC State.
Yeah.
Savion Jackson.
Savion
Yeah.
Jackson. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of a tweener to me. I like a little bit of what I saw from him with regard to him being able to use some of his bull rush. He has some strength, some good functional strength, but kind of light in the pants. Even if we're talking about as a 5 tech, I want to say, like I said, he was like in between 260, 250, not overly athletic, but someone that I think could get in the mix and provide some additional rush, whether it be from a 5 tech position or reducing down to a potential 3 tech. I don't think I would play him anywhere further inside than a 4-eye for the time being, but there's some opportunity there. It's going to be a hard time cracking this roster with those top 4 names and then guys that have some experience already with Farmer and Shelby. So, when we're talking to Collins, Jackson, Morris, Brash, they're really going to be fighting for their lives here. It's not something that's unexpected, but this is going to be probably one of the toughest groups again to make the roster for.
Yeah, it's a good looking group on paper for sure. I think, the question with Thule is he was mostly, in my opinion, he was an effort guy last year. He won a lot on the stunts and twists with the other more proven edge rushers. Is he developing as a true pass rusher? Is that moveset developing? Is he going to be able to win on his own more consistently? Because like Craig said, when Bosa got hurt, the production went down because they didn't have that same flexibility to stunt and twist with them and create opportunities by really attacking double teams with Bosa and basically giving him a free run at the quarterback. So is he going to be able to get those free runs on his own? Is he going to be able to get quick wins, get to the quarterback quickly? He had a great rookie season. By no means am I saying he's not going to be a fantastic player. I think he wound up with 5 or 6 sacks last year. And I think we all predicted somewhere around 5 sacks for him. So he basically met expectations. He flashed for the early part of the season, kind of ran out of gas late, was really good against the run. But how does that next step in his development go in terms of being a one-on-one pass rusher who can win without the help of the stunts and twists and games up front? Dupree, great weapon to have as a 4th pass rusher. He's a guy, I think he's coming off a 6 or 6.5 sack season last year. He's not going to be on the field as much as he's used to being on the field. So you assume he's going to be fresh and maybe get more juice out of him when he is on the field. I have a really hard time seeing Rumph make the roster. Another guy who was very much a Staley/Telesco kind of project. Never understood how a guy whose dad teaches the defensive line, teaches pass rushers at the NFL level, could be so underdeveloped with his technique and especially his hands at the NFL level. He just never really developed, never put the weight on. He may not be able to put the weight on. And I feel like there might be a couple guys who are just a little bit more talented than him with a shot at being on the practice squad. One name in particular that stands out is Andrew Farmer, who's a guy that I loved last year in the UDFA class. I think Farmer's a guy who, with the right strength and conditioning, with Ben Herbert and the coaching staff that they brought in, I think Farmer could be a guy who could really take a big step forward, spending a year on the practice squad and maybe getting sprinkled in here and there at times. Other than that, I'm really not sure. There may be one other practice squad spot. Morris Bash is a guy who was really productive in college. Watched a little bit of his tape. Wasn't all that impressed. Felt like he was kind of stiff, kind of clunky, didn't have a whole lot of juice. So I'm not really sure where he fits in. I think he played at like 245 and he was playing with his hand in the dirt, which didn't really suit him very well. Didn't look like he had the juice to stand up consistently and win that way. So we'll see what happens there. But those top 4 are really nice. You get something out of Farmer, continue to develop him. That group's looking really good.
Yeah, I mean, that 4-man rotation is arguably the deepest edge group in the NFL. I mean, to have a rotation of having Thule and Bud Dupree off the bench and then also being able to keep legs fresh when rushing multiples at different times is really going to be key for this Chargers defense. And it's weak all around, but if you can get to the quarterback, that's going to kind of cover up some of your blemishes on the back end. So Bosa, Mack, Thule, Dupree, a nice 1, 2, 3, 4 punch there on the edge. But yeah, I mean, Chris Rumph is the odd man out. I don't know that they're going to carry more than 4. They didn't last year. They probably won't this year. And this is another guy who was under the Telesco Staley regime, kind of one of their pet projects, and didn't work out. And I looked at what they have Rumph up to this offseason, and he's at 244. Do you guys remember what he was when he got drafted?
240?
230?
244.
Oh.
So he in 3 seasons hasn't put on a pound, and teams love to lie about that stuff. So he might be 240 right now, but he hasn't put on any weight, no muscle. The one thing he needed to do this offseason, and just like Jamie mentioned, the rest of the intangibles just aren't there. He's got the speed and the quickness, but everything else needs a lot of work, and he hasn't progressed since he's got here. So he hasn't put the weight on. The hands haven't improved. The pass rushing toolbox is still very weak, and it shows every time he's on the field because he's getting thrown out of plays. So I don't see how Rumph makes this team unless it's through the practice squad. Farmer and Shelby were 2 developmental guys the Chargers could hold on to for another year on the practice squad. They did it last season. Tremont Morris Brash, like Jamie mentioned, very productive. 3 consecutive seasons at UCF with double-digit sacks. He had 20 this past season. He's got a really good first step. Worked pretty well with his hands. I felt like he could navigate through traffic pretty well. Through the run game, he set a pretty good edge. But the thing that got him undrafted is he tested so poorly that he probably was taken off most teams' boards. The worst part is he's got really, really short arms. So maybe they're listing him at linebacker thinking that he might transition to a stand-up off-ball linebacker. I'm not sure, but it's hard to ignore 20 sacks in a season. So they're definitely going to try him out. He's worth bringing in on the team. Savion Jackson, like Craig mentioned, a tweener, shines in the run game, better when he shoots gaps inside than on the outside. Good strength. He's got a pretty good get off on the line of scrimmage on the interior. Not really athletic enough to win one-on-one on an island outside, and hasn't really had a healthy season of 5 years at NC State. So I don't know. I'd like to see Jackson get some work inside in camp rather than on the outside. Maybe be a kind of a flexibility there with him. And then the last guy, Chris Collins, they actually cut Brevin Allen, who a lot of people liked last year, to make room for Chris Collins, because I guess he was really, really impressive at the rookie minicamp. He is huge. He's 6'5", 255. The size is great. Production is very, very minimal. In 5 years in North Carolina and Minnesota, his career high in tackles was 15 total. 4 out of his 6 seasons, he finished the season with single-digit sacks. So he must have looked really, really good on the field because the production just is not there. The size is good, but there's nothing there. So, they're going to carry 4. We know it's Bosa, Mack, Tooley, and Dupree. Everybody else is basically fighting for a practice squad slot at this point. And there's some interesting names here and there. Farmer, I like. Morris Brash could maybe make it too. But outside of that, this is pretty much locked down. Everybody else, it feels like, are kind of, other than special teams, are kind of up in the air. But this group's locked in and loaded. It's the top 4 and nobody else.
Just a little side note. Morris Brash had 3 consecutive seasons of double-digit tackles for loss, not sacks. He had 8.5 sacks last year. I think 6 or 6.5 the year before. So
really? I'm not on that?
Yeah. I think you just looked at the wrong column. But still really productive. 8.5 sacks last year. That's nothing to sneeze at. But you were saying that, and I was like, that's not what I remember seeing. So I went back and looked. But still really productive. And even with 8.5 sacks, he's still registering 12 tackles for loss that are not sacks. So he's effective against the run, or productive against the run. So still highly productive, just not quite as productive as
as 20 sacks.
As 20 sacks.
Yeah, I don't know. That sounds pretty good though. I like that.
Also, Collins kind of feels like the new Chris Rumph with regard to like a new pet project, because he's body beautiful for the position. It's just the production, like Garrett mentioned, isn't there. But you can see him on tape. He looks like he should perform better, more consistently than what he does. So they have to see something there as far as development is concerned. Because if you can get a guy with that size to play with some consistency and create any sort of pressure off of the edge, you could potentially have something in a rotational, placement. But overall, I mean, if you're talking about someone else who could just be like the apple of a coaching staff's eye and they see some tools, then I would bet it's probably Chris Collins.
I admittedly did not watch Collins, but isn't he an off-ball linebacker? Is he an edge guy or an off-ball? I thought he was off. I thought he
Collins?
was off-ball. Yeah.
No, he was edge.
No, he's edge.
Oh, was he?
Mhm.
I think,
Right.
and
He's
he played
huge.
a
He's
little.
like 6'3", 255. But
Mhm.
Oh man, you're totally right. Yeah, 20 and a half tackles for a loss, 13 the year before, and then 10 the year before. All right. Well,
That was bothering you, wasn't it, Garrett?
God bless it, man. You do all this research and get it wrong. Look in the wrong column. Son of a bitch. Well, I'm glad you corrected me though. Good. All right. Cool. Let's talk about off ball. Here we go. Linebackers. It's a kind of light group here. It is Denzel Perryman, Deion Henley, Junior Carlson, Troy Dye, Nick Neiman, Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, and Shane Lee. Perryman, the rookie Junior Carlson, and Henley are going to be part of a pretty heavy three-man rotation. Troy Dye is going to be a name to watch. The coaching staff was really, really high on Dye in the OTAs. He got some starter reps in rotation before training camp. It's OTAs, so you can't read too much into it, but they definitely had some glowing reviews about Dye. Was a special teamers with the Vikings, got a lot of work there, and then also started the back half at off-ball linebacker for the Vikings. So he's going to be depth there for the Chargers as kind of LB4 right now. Nick Neiman, always been a depth guy, has some special teams ability, hopefully should not amass too many snaps on defense. We've seen enough of that. And this is a group that is very thin, a lot of inexperience. So the UDFAs might just have a chance here of making the roster just because they just don't have the depth. And if they, hopefully some of them can make some noise. Shane Lee, highly recruited at high school, went to Alabama, transferred to USC the last 2 seasons, athletic, attacks the line of scrimmage in the run game, showed off some nice power taking on contact. He's kind of average in coverage, uses that power to blow up the line as a pass rusher, but really struggled with slot receivers and running backs running sideline to sideline, just doesn't have the long speed. And then Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste has really good eyes when he plays in phase, knives in the backfield. He's been effective in his career at UCF and Ole Miss, recording 16 tackles for loss in the last 3 seasons. Feel free to check that too, Jamie. Jean-Baptiste is a little undersized, but feels like toolsy enough that could be in the conversation to probably be a practice squad candidate, if not sneak into the 53 if you can. They carried 6 linebackers last season. So if you've got Perryman, Henley, Colson pretty much locked in there, Dye with his special teams ability and some depth, you've got 4 guys with about 3 other, Neiman, Jean-Baptiste, and Lee for 2 spots. So looks like, 2 of those 3 names could make the roster. And just a side note, while looking at this and throughout this whole offseason, this for me feels like the spot where the Chargers are going to be really, 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 really active once teams start making their cuts after 53. Like, they have got to get better. Henley didn't play last year. Perryman, was getting up there. Colson's a rookie. Dye has only real half a season of starting experience. They got to get some kind of linebacker presence there. And then having a guy like Neiman or a UDFA in that group, this feels like a player that they fill with a cut casualty by week 1.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really dicey as you start to move from the front out towards the back of the defense.
Exactly,
right? It starts to get really dicey, really scary. You mentioned Dye's special teams experience. Neiman, granted, it was with a different regime, but Neiman was a core special teamer for the last couple of years for the Chargers.
Yep.
So you would expect that at least gives him a leg up on a roster spot, and at least until somebody outperforms him.
Yep.
Jean-Baptiste is a guy who I was able to watch either last night or today. And, I agree. I thought he had good eyes. He was quick to find people, find ball carriers. He's able to navigate traffic down around the line of scrimmage, shoot through gaps, and make plays. He isn't overly powerful, which can show up in his tackling. It also shows up in how he takes on blocks and his inability to shed blocks at times. So he can stick to people in the run game for sure. And I don't really see him as a sideline to sideline guy. He's kind of a straight downhill, wrap him up, drag him down. He's not going to blow people up. I don't think you really want him necessarily in coverage. He looks kind of stiff and confused when he's out in the open field trying to cover people. So I'm not really sure you want him out there. So he's probably like a special teams guy / 2-down linebacker, kind of like their new version of Aman Ogbongbemiga. I know I was going to butcher that.
That's all right.
But yeah, I think there are some traits there. I just think as a UDFA, obviously, nothing really stands out, and he's not super flashy or exciting, but he's a guy who could certainly contribute on special teams, and maybe find his way into developing into like a 2-down linebacker. I did not watch Shanley, so I can't speak to him.
Okay.
Yeah, this group, lots of question marks. You can say that about a couple, but with regard to where they stand on the team and just some of these names, I think the biggest standout, of course, is going to be how quickly Junior Colson sees the field. Who's going to be your starting two? Is it going to be Perriman and Colson? I mean, again, Colson should have a leg up due to his intimate knowledge of the scheme. Is Deion Henley going to be more of like a 3rd-down sub package option? Even though we saw that when Henley had an opportunity to play, he flashed. It's just one of those huge question marks as to why he couldn't see more of the field last year. The coaching staff seems to really like Troy Dye, and I think apparently he came to the Chargers because there was an opportunity for him to see more regulatory snaps on the defensive side of the ball and not just be a core special teamer. So it's kind of up in the air. Again, I think Colson has a little bit of an advantage just because if you can have someone who understands the defense to the level that he does in the middle of the defense, just kind of being a coach there at the second level of sorts, then that helps you, because right now you're sorely lacking, whether it be at experience. I mean, you have Denzel Perriman there, but he's very limited. He's going to be more of your downhill thumper, run defender, and everything else after that is just kind of, who the hell knows. So we'll see what happens there. As far as the other names, Nick Niemann, good special teamer, I think that's where he's going to be. I don't see him ascending as to one of the regulars at the second level, seeing the field for any significant defensive snaps. Jean Baptiste is interesting because I think he has an opportunity to make the team potentially as a core special teamer. He had like over 260 snaps that he played special teams throughout his college career. So he's someone who can kind of, make his hay there. Just one of those guys who ends up being maybe one of those career special teamers, though I don't see him as a significant contributor on the defense. But yeah, this group as a whole is scary. But it's been that way for a bit, whether it just be guys who weren't made to play the role, like someone who's no longer with the team, Kenneth Murray, best of luck to you. But at least now you have a guy who they drafted in Colson, who I was a huge fan of there in the second round, that understands what's needed from the position and, shows the instincts, has good athleticism, and you've got the experience with Perriman. So at least you're not completely bare bones, and you feel, even though you haven't seen these guys play, I feel a little bit more confident about.
No, we lost him. We don't even know. What are you confident about? You left us hanging. Craig, if you can hear us, get out and get back on. You're frozen. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I was just going to say, looking at this group, you have to be at least a little bit nervous about what happens when Perriman either gets hurt, gets suspended, or takes out one of his teammates. Which is kind of one of the. It's like in baseball when you have the three true outcomes: the walk, the home run, or the strikeout.
Yep. With
Perriman, it's the injury, the injured teammate, or the suspension for hitting somebody dirty. So if and when that happens, what happens to this group? Like Craig mentioned, Henley hardly played last year. We don't know what to expect from him. He flashed when he was on the field, but he's super raw. Colston knows the defense really well, but he's a rookie. He's going to have some growing pains, I'm sure. And then from there, it's a bunch of question marks. So you would certainly hope they're very attentive and very active on the waiver wire come cut down day as linebackers start getting cut, because this is a group that's going to need some beefing up. And maybe this is even a position that they're monitoring towards a trade deadline. If the season's going well, maybe they're looking to trade for a linebacker at some point, because one or two injuries in this group and you're in some serious trouble. It's not a great group on paper, and it gets thin really fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're assuming that Perriman, Henley, and Colson work out in some kind of regard. because we're not even talking about if they're really, really bad and they don't have any depth behind them. We're hoping at least they can work a little bit. Craig, you left us hanging. You said at least we're confident about, and then you cut out.
Oh, great. Awesome. I just moved into a new place. Everything's going haywire right now. So yeah, just saying that I feel a little bit more confident about this group, at least the first 3 names, more so than I did with maybe names here in the last 2 to 3 years. Not even because of the experience overall, just because I think they're better fits for the role. And some of these guys are a little bit more instinctual and show some better chops as run defenders and more short tacklers, should I say. So a little bit better, even though, coming up from bare bones, it's not saying a whole lot.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to watch Shane Lee, Craig?
Very little. Not enough to say that I have a real opinion on him one way or the other.
Yeah, I'm curious what you both think about him. Because he was really, really highly recruited out of high school. Went to Alabama, went to USC, so there was a lot there. Didn't really pan out. I'm just curious. Anyway, all right. So moving on to corners here. Even more dicey, as Jamie said. Asante Samuel Jr., Christian Fulton, Jasir Taylor, Dean Leonard, Tarheeb Still, Cam Hart, Matt Hankins, Chris Wilcox, Robert Kennedy, and Zamari Walton. Jamie, how are we feeling?
Not great.
I wasn't lying.
We talked about this on the podcast we did with Michael McLean earlier in the week. Mm-hmm. And I said that this group has a real chance to be one of, if not the worst cornerback groups in the NFL this year. It's not great on paper. And it's hard to look at that and see where too many guys are going to step up and really surprise us. So, we know Zon's going to make the roster, right? He's going to be your de facto CB1 because there's no other choice.
Yeah.
Fulton, who knows what to expect from him? Do they see him as an outside corner? Do they see him as a slot guy? Is he going to move around? Can he stay healthy? Is he going to be productive? Is he going to stay on the field? Who the hell knows? Is he a guy who could get cut at some point in camp despite being one of the more experienced guys on the roster, which, based on his history, is entirely possible, although it seems like they brought him in based on the expectation that he will at least have an opportunity to compete for a lot of snaps on this roster. And then you look at the rest of the guys who were here last year. Jasir Taylor, the coaching staff, he's a lot like Tito Abonia, right? He's one of those guys that the coaching staff loved, hyped up. There was all kinds of hype for him in every camp that he's been in with the Chargers. He's had some brief flashes during the regular season, but for the most part, he's looked his best against third and fourth stringers who didn't wind up making opposing rosters and has not looked very good in the regular season. The tackling, which was supposed to be one of his strong suits, was not a strong suit last year. He frequently looked pretty lost in coverage. He is a slot only, in my opinion. I don't think you can expect him to play corner outside. I don't think he's a guy who's going to transition to safety very well. Dean Leonard is a guy he's one of those tools guys, but can he get his head around? Can he stay in phase? Can he make plays on the football? Who the hell knows? He looks like he's pretty good on special teams, but what does that mean in terms of making the roster? Still, as a draft pick, he was a 5th or 6th round pick. He's a guy who you figure is going to have an inside track at the slot corner role, competing with Jasir Taylor, and more than likely making the roster. Hart is the one guy that you look at on this list and say, I could probably see him really ascending and grabbing that CB2 role. It almost has to happen with the way the rest of this depth chart is put together. Hankins flashed at times in camp last year, didn't get much run in the regular season. So one guy that I like, who I watched quite a bit of, is I like Zamari Walton as a UDFA. He has some things that you can't teach. He's 6'3", 190. He's got really good length. I think he's a boundary corner in the making because of his length. He understands where he is on the field. He uses the sideline to his advantage. He typically, when he's asked to play press or man coverage, he typically stays in phase with the wide receiver and is able to squeeze them to the sideline. His weaknesses are there are times where he needs an extra half step to a step to get out of his back pedal, which can leave him trailing. He has a hard time getting his head around, much like Dean Leonard does with the ball in the air, which can lead to PI calls. But there's an athleticism there. He's a willing tackler, but he's not a particularly good tackle. But I think from a coverage standpoint, there are some good ball skills, and the length is enticing. And like I said, you can't teach the length. Either you have it or you don't. And he definitely has it. So Walton's a guy that I like, who I think could either wind up on the practice squad or maybe sneak in as the fifth corner potentially, depending on how things go with the rest of this. I could easily see Taylor and Leonard not making this roster, being that they're both projects of the previous regime, and neither one of them has put a whole lot on tape the last 2 years. A whole lot good on tape, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Another group, another set of question marks, clearly. You got your obvious boundary corners, most likely Asante Samuel Jr. and Christian Fulton, because they, like Jamie mentioned, kind of sort of have to be. With ASJ, you're sacrificing both size and tackling, but that's kind of an issue for Fulton also, as far as tackling is concerned. He's got more size, but you can't even really consider that tandem even marginal in that regard. Although Fulton had like a pretty solid year defending the run on the perimeter with the Titans in 2022, but he also only played like 11 games. Fulton has yet to play more than 13 games throughout his career in any year. And we also know that ASJ had his fair share of injuries as well. So things could get really tricky there in a hurry if either of those guys were to go down, unless Dean Leonard were to step up and his development takes a massive jump this season, which is why we're trusting his coaching staff to be able to develop some of these guys more so than they have under the previous regime. Cam Hart would love it if he took that step up to be CB2. Super raw at this point. So we'll see where that goes. I saw people considering him even playing safety, but I don't think that's necessarily where he's going to be best served. I think he's a better boundary corner than he'll ever be a safety. I think they just see the size and assume that he would make that transition. But again, super raw. Tarheeb Still's the name here to keep an eye on with regard to competing for a starting role, because I think, and I mentioned this before in our pod earlier with Michael this week, that by midseason, there's a significant chance that you're looking at him being your starting slot over Jasir Taylor. Just a more solid tackler at that position. And I think he might actually be more instinctual, even though Jasir is a better athlete overall. But when we're talking about just having all the tools, I think he's the most well-rounded of the two. And you hit the nail on the head with Walton there, Jamie. He has what I think is a skill set that can be coached into being a solid corner. The size off the charts, again, not afraid to stick his nose in as a tackler, just needs to develop the skill set overall as far as technique is concerned. Everything that's wrong with Walton, I feel like can be coached to cover. Him being a longer athlete is probably why he has issues with change of direction. It's a typical thing. Like when you're talking about corners 6'2 plus, they're not all going to be the most fluid of athletes, which is why technique is going to have to be first and foremost their thing that they lean on, because athleticism is going to be lacking just based on their overall length and size. But of these names here, I like Walton. I mean, Chris Wilcox he feels like Mike Davis 2.0. I'm not just saying that because he also went to BYU and I think they're like the same size. And I think they ran similar 40 times. So it's really weird. He's almost a carbon copy of Michael Davis. So I'm not exactly sure what the expectations are there from him. He's a solid athlete. I just don't know if he's going to be one of those guys that ever amounts to very much on the field, because, I mean, at this point, we're looking at someone who's going to have to develop here in a hurry. I think he's a little bit older at this point as well. I'm not sure of his age, but I almost feel like I remember him being a bit older. So just in general, the cornerback room, up in the air, lots of names. After you get beyond those first two, I mean, when you're already asking questions about who your slot's going to be potentially through camp, you know you have some stuff to worry about. And then we're talking about experience beyond that being an issue, just all sorts of issues the Chargers are going to have to work through at this position. And this is exactly why they invested so much into those edge rushers, because you got to do something to help these guys out on the outside.
I mean, it feels like there's one corner, and then just everything else is in flux. It's Zont, and then everything else is just, I hope it all works out at this point. Because, I mean, I don't know if we even – I mean, he is going to be the de facto CB1, like Jamie said, but I don't know that we're all comfortable him being CB1. But obviously he's the best one on this roster right now. We're all hoping a change of scenery is going to help and really benefit Christian Fulton because this team is really going to need it. Jasir Taylor has struggled, had a strong start to his rookie season, then kind of fell off. Dean Leonard has just always fallen off from preseason to any snap he ever gets. On special teams, he's okay, but as your boundary corner, he's an issue. We all have high hopes for Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart. We'll see how they fare in the preseason. And then, Matt Hankins, he got signed and released 3 times during the season last year. I mean, he's a guy that was at the very bottom of the practice squad that they would take out and bring back in and take out and bring back in. And Matt Hankins has been with 3 different teams. Or no. Matt Hankins has been released and signed, and then Wilcox is the guy who's been with 3 different teams. So those guys are just kind of question marks. And then you've got these UDFAs. I'm with you guys on Walton. I love the size and length, and I know he has some struggles in his back pedal, but it feels like his recovery speed is really good because you'll see him break on balls and get some PBUs really late in the rep. He's had at least 7 PBUs in the last 3 seasons. He had 9 this past season. It feels like when he's one-on-one on an island, he does pretty good and will get his nose in there. I felt like he picked and chose during when there was a lot of dirty work at the line of scrimmage, but the size and athleticism is there. I feel like the coverage skills are above average, and really there's enough there that I feel like he's a strong practice squad candidate. Robert Kennedy played multiple DB spots throughout his college career. He was best suited playing in the nickel. Doing some reading on him. He had some personality concerns. He went the JUCO route, bounced around to 3 different other colleges, has a ton of experience in multiple schemes, athletic DB, pretty good ball skills, good with the ball in his hands too. Had 2 defensive touchdowns in the last season, 2 seasons, 1 defensive touchdown in the last 2 seasons, and could add some competition to the slot corner spot, but you feel like still is going to definitely be ahead of him, if not, Jasir Taylor as well. So he's got, he's kind of on the outside looking in with 2 bodies in front of him, but has a nice skill set too. But, you feel like Zont and then Christian Fulton, hopefully, unless Fulton bottoms out, are going to definitely make this roster. Still and Hart are the rookies. They're going to make that roster. That's 4 players right there. They carried 5 last year. It just feels like, it's going to be a dart throw with Jasir Taylor and Dean Leonard, and then the 2 practice squad guys, Hankins and Wilcox, and then the UDFAs, Kennedy and Walton, just kind of battling for probably one spot at that point. And who knows, man, this might be another spot where they look at the cuts and see who's a cut casualty and maybe add a corner here too.
Yeah. I mean, it's really all a dart throw after you get past on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's question marks on all of them. I'm pretty excited about Walton. I love the length. I love the size. I think he's got a projectable frame, a guy who can pack on some weight and without losing any athleticism. And I thought his tape with Georgia Tech was better than it was with Ole Miss. Did not like him in off man and zone coverage as much as I did on the line of scrimmage, pressing opposing wide receivers and really disrupting their routes. That's where he really excels with his length. So be excited to watch him.
I'm not sure what the deal is lately with coaches wanting to take these longer, bigger corners and having them play off in zone, especially when they have issues with change of direction and just kind of getting out of the back pedal and breaking forward on the ball. It's not advised, but again, it's kind of all the rage now. That screams press man corner. And more often than not, what you're seeing are these guys playing in space where, you're not doing them any service at all.
Stephen P., we talked about trading for maybe a linebacker if it's available. Stephen P., cornerback room looks young and not great. Any chance you think Harbaugh tries to trade for a more experienced corner? You think corner's another spot they might trade in for, possibly?
I think it's a possibility. I think it might become a necessity at some point, especially if they're winning games and they feel like they've got a chance to win a wild card or, potentially win a division.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think linebacker and cornerback are two positions in particular where they should have their antenna up all season long, looking for opportunities.
Well, I mean, Garrett, did we not have some intel about a potential situation with one Greg Newsome and the Browns in the offseason earlier this year? Potentially, maybe.
We sure did. There were rumblings for sure.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's something that continues here going into camp. They clearly see that they have needs. You've got guys here that are on prove-it deals like Christian Fulton. ASJ is in a contract year. So if you're looking forward, not just this year, but into the future, then you probably want to get on something as soon as possible. And if you can make it happen without having to give up an arm and a leg, then yeah, I'd say you go that route, but you can't feel confident going into the season with what you currently have. It'd be a little insane.
So what Craig's referring to is that we got some news. If you guys are part of the Discord, if not, join the Patreon and do all that stuff. But they were in talks, at least exploring a possible trade with Greg Newsome from the Browns during the free agent period, which, depending on how training camp goes, might be a stronger possibility, depending on how the Browns cornerback room kind of shakes out, because they've got a lot of good corners and they can't pay them all. So Chargers are definitely going to be looking out for Greg Newsome. So that's a name to watch for sure during this preseason and training camp. So that's definitely a strong possibility, Steven. All right, last up here is safeties. Let's finish out this DB group and this defensive breakdown. Safeties here, Craig: Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, Tony Jefferson, JT Woods, AJ Finley, and then the UAFAs, Akeem Dent, Thomas Harper, and Jalen Phillips.
Secondary really is a mess, isn't it?
Yeah. It's worse when you
worse every time you see it. Yeah, exactly. In my mind,
on paper.
I knew it was bad in my head, but seeing it's just like a slap in the face.
I got to tell you, it was sad putting these graphics together, man. I'm going, wait a minute, this is it. There's got to be other names.
Definitely depression-inducing. I could understand that. But overall, we mentioned this before earlier in the week in the pod that we did with Michael. Just seeing Tony Jefferson's name up there tells you all you need to know. 32 years old. Did not play last year, was he a scout with the Ravens last season? So I guess look at it this way. He's got less tread on his tires than other 30-plus-year-old DBs in the league. I mean, I don't know how much that counts for at this point, but hey, I guess it could be worse, potentially. So at least Jefferson comes in again with experience in the scheme. That helps you. If he can give you anything at all, it frees Derwin up. And maybe it keeps JT Woods off the field, maybe, which I'm sure he could probably handle on his own. He doesn't need any help, but we don't know what to expect from JT. We know the names ahead of him. Derwin's going to be Derwin Alohi. He had a career year last year, so those two spots are solidified. JT Woods is just the biggest question mark here. We don't know who he's going to be. He was not a part of this regime as far as selections were concerned. He was another Staley guy. And, he didn't play very much. There was some, I guess it was an illness situation. We never got really much clarity on that last season. But, I mean, as far as a raw athlete is concerned, dude's fast, he's tall, he can jump high. You can't really change direction worth of anything at all. And the tackling is a problem, which is an issue when you play safety, because as the last line of defense, you got to be able to stop people. So beyond that, Akeem Dent is a name that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. One of the reasons why, and I got a little bit of intel from someone that I'm cool with that's associated with the Saints. They were really high on him as a UDFA, and they wanted him. He picked the Chargers ultimately because he had more of an opportunity there. Smart guy. But anybody in the Saints secondary within the last 5 to 6 years, if they're crazy about, you should probably consider it, because they've done a really good job at selecting DBs here. They don't always stick around, and there's an affinity to give them to the Eagles for no reason at all. People just like giving the Eagles their stuff. But yeah, Dent, someone who could probably make a name for himself and have an opportunity on the defense. I like what he does, especially as an overhang safety and, breaking up plays underneath, I think is where he really shines. So if you want to have him like as your lurker, for crossers, anything that goes up the seams. He's really good at that. Over the top, he's limited as an athlete as far as deep speed is concerned, but he plays really well instinctually. He has good eyes, so that's what allows him to really break on balls and kind of get PBUs underneath. And the plays that he does make over the top is because he doesn't take very many false steps. He understands route combinations and concepts. So again, for someone who may not be the best athlete overall, if you have good instincts and pretty good technique, you can kind of bridge that gap. So Dent feels like someone who could potentially be someone who makes the roster, maybe even finds his way over JT Woods. AJ Finley, someone who's shown up in the last year or so as a potential player. There are options for younger guys. It's just there isn't a ton of experience. And also you're looking at players who, at this point, you have to understand where their fit is. You have to look at Mentor's defense as a whole and see how safeties are utilized, and you can kind of see where each guy fits. The problem is there are some names in here that I'm not totally sure about what their fit will be. I have confidence overall in Mentor just because you look at a defense that he had at Michigan and there wasn't a single first-round draft pick on the defense. So, I mean, we're talking about a team that still found themselves as the best defense in all of college football. So drilling, routine into these guys, making sure that they understand these concepts from top to bottom and making sure that their technique sound is going to go a long way. But as far as the safety group is concerned, it definitely gets scary really after Derwin, if you want to be honest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, that's for sure. Because James and Gilman are your starters, but I'm not totally sure that Gilman deserved the contract he got, but we're past that now. He's the starting free safety. Derwin's in the box. And it says a lot about this roster that a guy who could take a whole year off of football is probably going to make your roster and be your third player on your depth chart now behind Derwin and Alohi. So AJ Finley, and somebody asked about Finley earlier in the chat, but this is a guy the three of us really, really liked last offseason as UDFA. He made the team, made some plays on special teams, really good size, great ball skills. With another year of experience, I think, going into this camp, I think Finley makes this team, and I'm really, really excited to see him in camp. He's a name I'm excited to watch. He's one of those guys that I'm going to be keying in on during training camp because I really like the potential of Finley. JT Woods, like Tito, like Jasir Taylor, like Dean Leonard, no longer gets a pass. It's a new regime, whole new priorities. And, like Craig is alluding to, I mean, whether it's health issues or personal issues or whatever, we're not privy to it, but he just hasn't played. And when he had a chance to play late last season, he was a scratch. So the crazy athleticism is great, but the rest is below subpar, really, so far in his career. So special teams is where you hope JT Woods could, hopefully prove his worth on this roster, but he's on the bubble. And this is a really, really thin group, and he's already on the bubble. This feels like a guy as a third-round pick that should automatically be locked in and ready to earn a role, but not with the way he's been playing. Dent is one of the quote-unquote big-name undrafted free agents. He played everywhere at Florida State. We saw him at the deep. We saw him in the box. We saw him as a nickel corner. He feels like a guy that wants to set a tone, loves to throw his body around, but doesn't really possess the pop with that small frame, but is definitely willing to get dirty. Put up some surprising numbers. You're talking about his athleticism, Craig. I can't believe he ran a 4.38 40 at his pro day. It was crazy because it doesn't feel like he ran that on the field, but I guess answering some athleticism questions. But what got him undrafted is the lack of size and length. And then also as a 4-year starter, there isn't just any real production there. He was on the field a lot, but he doesn't have a ton of interceptions. I think he only had one his whole career. Not a ton of PBUs, not a ton of tackles, just a couple. And he was on the field a lot. So I know that's concerning for some, but he definitely has a skill set to make this team, especially with the group they have. Thomas Harper, another DB from Notre Dame, physical in the box, really, really strong tackler. He only missed 3 tackles all of last season. Doesn't really have the ball skills. but he's pretty physical. He's got the familiarity with the safeties coach, Chris O'Leary, obviously was teammates with Cam Hart. Harper might be a name to watch here in this group. And then Jalen Phillips is best suited as a box safety, was a really, really important piece on special teams for Clemson. So he's got size, length, showed up some nice physicality in the run game, but he's lacking speed, which is going to limit him to in the box and camp, but some real big special teams value. If he makes his team, it'll be because he was so good at special teams. So a guy that could make some noise there. But this team carried 5 last season. Derwin's in, Gilman's in. I'm going to say Finley's in. And then it's Jefferson, Woods, Dent, Harper, Phillips for probably 2 spots. So this is going to be a pretty big challenge for all these guys, and it's going to be a real competition because they need the best 5 or 6 safeties they can possibly get.
Would it surprise anybody if at some point during camp Tony Jefferson was like, I can't do this. My body can't do this. I thought I could, but I'm out. Like,
yeah,
this is a guy who was retired until 6 weeks ago. So we're all assuming he's going to make the roster, and I'm not sure that's a foregone conclusion at 32 after a year off. So we'll see what happens. I had a crazy thought with JT Woods, and it's not something we discussed with Michael McLean, but somebody asked about this role on the team in the chat, and it just kind of occurred to me. With a track athlete who has some crazy athletic ability and some insane straight line speed, is Woods a guy you might consider being that second returner? If he's not able to get on the field on special teams, tackling, or on defense, would you put the ball in his hands as a return man and see if he can just outrun people?
Here's the problem. The change of direction issue. If it's a one cut and go situation, it's different. But now with the new return setup, there's going to be more space to have to operate in. I don't trust him in space whatsoever as far as movement skills are concerned. Again, if it was just about making one guy miss and running in a straight line, cool, But I think you need a little bit better athlete as far as agility is concerned with regard to being a returner.
I get the change of direction concerns, but I guess what I'm looking at it as, he looks bad changing direction when the offensive player knows where he's going and Woods doesn't. Would Woods possibly look better changing direction when he can set up moves and he knows where he's going and the coverage team doesn't?
I think you might be giving him too many. I'm sorry. I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer. It's like just watching him, his movement, it doesn't look like he's very good in space in general. Now, again, if you hand him the ball and allow him to go to work, we don't know what that looks like. I mean, we saw him, after he got some interceptions there in college and his ability to run with the ball after the catch. So he still wasn't the best as far as making guys miss, but very good athlete. It's worth a shot. But also, can he cover? I mean, I'm sorry, can he judge the ball in the air and catch kicks? Like that's all something that will have to be figured out in camp. Of course, you don't just throw him back down and expect him to be able to do it. But what are his ball skills like? It's not the easiest thing to do. So yeah, I mean, why not give him a shot? I guess if you're going to keep him around, you got to find something for him to do, because apparently, what you drafted him for isn't working out. He was already handicapped being a safety in the Big 12, so came in with basically half a leg to stand on as it was. So.
Yeah, I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just saying, I'm just thinking out lound.
You're trying to find something to do with him.
Something to do with him that takes advantage of whatever skills they think he has. And I mean, what ultimately got him drafted was he was really good at catching the ball when it hit him in the tummy. So maybe he can do that on special teams.
Yep. Tippy long stock.
You guys already mentioned it. I think AJ Finley makes this roster. He's able to play in center field. He can play split safety. He can play in the box. He can tackle. He's got decent ball skills. He's going to add special teams value. So I think he makes this roster. And I think you're probably looking at a situation where the last 3 safeties on this team probably have to add some level of special teams value. Harper to me is more of a slot guy than he is a safety. I think. I think he's going to wind up competing for that nickel spot more so than a safety spot, but we'll see on that. Phillips was a guy that I liked. I enjoyed watching him. He isn't flashy. He doesn't make splash plays, but he just always seems to be where he's supposed to be. And I saw him play some single high. I saw him play some split safety. I saw him play in the box. I saw him match up really well with Johnny Wilson in the slot at times. So I think there's versatility there, and there's a level of discipline and experience there, playing multiple positions that could provide some value for him. And you guys talked about the special teams value. So he's a guy I would keep an eye on. He's not blazing fast. He's not a guy who made a ton of interceptions in college, but he just always seems to be where he's supposed to be. He always appears to be where he's supposed to be. You see him cutting off routes, anticipating routes, just doing the little things and kind of blending into the defense in the best possible way as a safety. So that's a guy I'd look out for in the preseason and in camp as a possible 4th or 5th safety who provides a lot of special teams value.
You know what I was thinking about?
Dent, Harper, and Phillips all have something, a little bit of something where they could be probably practice squad spots, if not fighting for a 53 spot.
Yeah, I was going to mention this. We spoke to this a bit on the pod earlier this week with Michael. When we're talking about Woods and his special teams ability, I mean, he may be a better gunner than he is anything else on punt.
You're talking about JT Woods?
Yeah, JT Woods. Sorry. So again, if we're just looking for reasons to keep athletes on the team, they have to provide something in more than one area. Overall, if we're talking about a safety being a return man, yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. I think we're good here, guys. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We're glad to be back. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and on YouTube. Join the Patreon, and we will be doing offensive breakdowns next week, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Salute.